Last week, a shocking revelation came to light when U.S. Attorney Lindsay Halligan admitted in front of a judge that there was a serious issue with the grand jury indictment against James Comey. Halligan revealed that the grand jury had not actually been given the final indictment. Instead, they had approved what was described as a blueprint version of the indictment, which was later altered before it was presented. This procedure is not just a simple error, it is illegal. The practice of modifying an indictment after the grand jury has approved it can immediately jeopardize a case, potentially leading to its dismissal. More importantly, such misconduct could lead to the disbarment of those involved, making it a serious violation of legal ethics and procedures. The consequences of this revelation were immediate and grave. Once the public learned of the blunder, it seemed almost certain that the case against James Comey would collapse. The legal community, along with those closely following the case, recognized that any case built on such a flawed foundation would have no chance of success. Prosecutors and defense lawyers alike saw the writing on the wall. This was a major setback for the Justice Department. For those involved, including Halligan, this mistake was not just a minor error, it could be the end of their careers in law. Legal professionals who mishandle grand jury proceedings in such a way could face significant consequences, including losing their right to practice law altogether. The weight of this admission by Halligan sent ripples through the legal community, and it seemed like the prosecution was doomed. However, just as the revelation sank in and many assumed the case would be dismissed, the Department of Justice (DOJ) scrambled to make a last-minute defense. In a desperate attempt to salvage the case, the DOJ filed another motion with the court. In this motion, they tried to discredit Halligan's statement, claiming that the grand jury had, in fact, seen the full indictment. The DOJ's sudden reversal raised questions and made the situation even more confusing. What had seemed like a clear admission of error now became a he said, she said scenario, where two conflicting accounts were being presented in front of a judge. This move by the DOJ only added more drama to an already chaotic situation, as both sides appeared to be at odds over what had actually happened with the grand jury's proceedings. At the heart of this legal mess is the issue of credibility. Halligan's statement was startling, and if true, it meant the entire case against Comey was built on a foundation of lies and misconduct. On the other hand, the DOJ's motion suggested a cover-up, an attempt to salvage the situation by altering the narrative after the fact. The stakes were incredibly high because one of these two parties was likely lying. Lying to a judge is a serious crime, one that could result in disbarment and could destroy any case currently being handled. For both the DOJ and Halligan, the implications of lying under oath or in court filings were profound. With so much at stake, it was clear that one of them had to be deceiving the court, and the fallout from this could lead to disastrous consequences for whichever party was found to be lying. The fallout was not just limited to the immediate case against Comey. The revelation of misconduct raised broader concerns about the integrity of the entire investigation. Both sides in this legal battle had more to lose than they were willing to admit. Halligan, though perhaps less experienced in handling cases like this, knew that if the truth came out, she could face serious professional repercussions. On the other hand, the DOJ was well aware that if the case was dismissed due to the mishandling of the grand jury indictment, they would lose face, look incompetent, and risk angering powerful political figures, including former President Donald Trump. Both sides understood the gravity of the situation, which is why the battle to control the narrative had become so intense. Each party's reputation and perhaps their career was on the line, making this a critical moment in the ongoing saga. As the revelation of Halligan's admission gained traction, the Department of Justice found itself in a tight spot. The admission that the grand jury had been presented with an incomplete indictment was a fatal blow to the prosecution's case. If the public and the courts believed that the legal process had been so badly mishandled, it would have rendered the entire case against James Comey invalid. Legal experts quickly pointed out that this kind of mistake was not a mere procedural error but a breach of legal ethics that could result in the case being dismissed outright. For Halligan, an insurance lawyer with no experience in criminal prosecution, the mistake was not just a professional failure, it was a career-ending one. The DOJ understood that if the case against Comey fell apart, it would be a monumental embarrassment, not just for the individuals involved, but for the department itself. In a panic-driven move, the DOJ scrambled to file a new motion in an attempt to rectify the situation. The motion sought to convince the judge that Halligan's public statement was false. According to the DOJ, the grand jury had indeed been shown the full indictment, contrary to what Halligan had claimed. In the motion, the DOJ tried to downplay the severity of the situation by suggesting that Halligan's statement was the result of a simple misunderstanding or an error. They presented this explanation in an attempt to reassure the judge and the public that everything was proceeding according to the law and that there was no need for concern. The DOJ's response, however, only added to the confusion and the growing sense of mistrust. While they tried to salvage the case, their attempt to cover up the mistake only raised more questions about the integrity of the investigation. The DOJ's panic was understandable. If the case were dismissed due to the grand jury's mishandling, it would be a massive blow to the department's credibility and authority. But more than that, it would raise serious concerns about the competence of those involved in the case, including the prosecutors and their superiors. The fallout from such a mistake would not only have immediate legal consequences but could also have lasting effects on the public's trust in the justice system. With so much at stake, the DOJ's decision to file a motion to contradict Halligan's statement seemed like their only option to keep the case alive. However, the move didn't exactly inspire confidence. Legal observers were quick to point out that the DOJ's sudden reversal looked suspicious, and it only deepened the sense of uncertainty surrounding the case. One of the key issues that emerged from the conflicting statements was the question of who was lying. Either Halligan had made a mistake in her public admission, or the DOJ was fabricating a story to protect the integrity of the case. The consequences of lying to a judge were severe, and both parties were aware of this. Lying in court is a serious offense that can result in disbarment and the dismissal of any case connected to the lie. So, with both sides facing serious potential legal trouble, it was crucial to determine which side had given false information. The stakes were incredibly high for both the DOJ and Halligan, as the outcome of this legal drama would not only affect the case against Camey but also their own careers and reputations. At this point, the case had become more than just a legal battle between Camey and the DOJ, it was now a battle of credibility. As both sides presented conflicting accounts of what had happened with the grand jury indictment, the court had to navigate a maze of legal missteps and contradictory statements. The DOJ's sudden motion was an attempt to reclaim control of the narrative and convince the judge that everything was fine, but many legal analysts were skeptical. They noted that it was highly unusual for a government agency to reverse a public statement so quickly without serious consequences. The rapid change in story only fueled speculation that the DOJ was covering up something far more serious than a simple mistake. Whether or not the DOJ would succeed in its last-ditch defense remained to be seen, but one thing was clear. The case against James Camey was in deeper trouble than anyone had anticipated. As the legal drama unfolded, the stakes continued to rise. Both sides were now playing a dangerous game of legal brinksmanship, and the outcome of the case was hanging by a thread. The DOJ's attempt to retract Halligan's statement created a perfect storm of uncertainty, and the entire situation was quickly turning into a legal spectacle. Both the DOJ and Halligan were aware that if it was proven that either party had lied to the judge, the consequences would be severe. Lying in a legal proceeding is not only a breach of ethics but also a crime that can lead to disbarment and the destruction of any case involved. The fallout from such an act would be devastating, and both sides knew it. One of the most significant issues that arose from this situation was the question of who had the most to lose by being caught in a lie. Halligan, despite her misstep, seemed to understand that admitting the mistake in her public statement was a risk she had to take. She knew that if it was revealed that the grand jury had been shown an incomplete indictment, she could face serious professional consequences, possibly losing her ability to practice law. Her statement in front of the judge had inadvertently put her career in jeopardy, but the alternative of trying to cover up the mistake could have been even worse. In this case, honesty, while damaging, might have been the only way for her to maintain any professional credibility. However, the DOJ, with its much larger institutional stakes, had far more to lose. The DOJ was in a far more precarious position. If it was revealed that they had mishandled the grand jury indictment or that they had lied to cover up the mistake, the case against Camey would likely be dismissed, and the department would be left scrambling to salvage its reputation. More than that, the DOJ's credibility would be shattered. The public and the courts expect the highest standards of honesty and transparency from government institutions, especially in high-profile cases like this. A failure to meet those standards would not only result in legal consequences but would also harm the public's trust in the justice system. The DOJ understood that its credibility was on the line, and the pressure to maintain control of the narrative was immense. In their efforts to protect themselves from the fallout, the DOJ's actions had turned into a full-blown cover-up attempt. The motion they filed in response to Halligan's admission was an attempt to erase the impact of her statement and shift the focus back to the case at hand. However, the move only raised more doubts. Legal experts and analysts began questioning the timing of the DOJ's motion and the inconsistency of their defense. It was highly unusual for a government agency to reverse its position so quickly without a valid explanation. This sudden change in story, coming so soon after Halligan's admission, made it appear as though the DOJ was scrambling to cover up something far more serious than a simple mistake. In legal battles like this, the appearance of dishonesty is just as damaging as the truth, and the DOJ's efforts to downplay the severity of the situation only made the case look more suspicious. Both sides were now entrenched in a battle over credibility, and the court had to make sense of a tangled web of conflicting statements. The grand jury's indictment had been called into question, and the integrity of the case was at risk. As the legal process continued, it became increasingly clear that the outcome of this case would not just depend on the facts of the indictment but also on the ability of the DOJ and Halligan to present their versions of events in a way that could withstand scrutiny. The legal community and the public would be watching closely to see how this case played out and whether the individuals involved could maintain their professional integrity in the face of such a high-profile scandal. As the legal showdown continued to unfold, the fallout from the mistakes made by both the Department of Justice and Lynn C.